Hi there, and welcome to Queer Armor. Today, we are talking bullets and how they work. There's a fair number of misconceptions around how bullets do their thing, and it is absolutely worth going into. There's a meme that has been floating around describing people shooting firearms as each person is a wizard, casting a spell to control a bomb, and each wizard does their magic differently. And to be honest, I love this metaphor on a lot of different levels. I think shooting a gun is something that you have to learn from multiple instructors and then adapt their lessons to you, because one of the major lessons you will ever learn about firearms is bodies are fucking weird and everybody's body is doing its own thing, and we are all kind of adapting what we learn to our own meat sacks. Anybody who's been to Rainbow Reload or taken lessons with me has heard me refer to guns in the safety briefing as controlled bombs, and honestly, that's not that far off from reality. Imagine a grenade going off. Normally, a grenade goes off in all directions. It's a ball of explosion. But imagine a metal box that contains the explosion on three sides. And now imagine that there is a fourth side. And you can suddenly see how you can control the direction of an explosion. Now, the earliest bullets were literally just metal balls. Musket balls like these are still in production, although they are made nowadays with slightly more modern production methods. Fun fact, the old school way of making these involved towers where they would heat up lead at the top, drop a set amount, let it form a ball on the way down with gravity, and then let it hit a pool of water to cool. This is the reason we still call target ammunition ball ammunition, by the way. The very first ammo was fired out of hand cannons, literally traditional cannons you carried around with you. Now, these were lit with a match that you lit separately, and this is very much a tube that you are turning into a somewhat controlled bombs. These both liked to not go off and go off in a very spectacular and unintentional way. Frankly, often when you were shooting one of these, you were holding a pipe bomb. That got turned into the arquebus, with the big step forward of put the lit fuse on a stick and then press a bar or pull a trigger, and you can put the fuse into the powder. This might seem like an advancement, but in reality, it's really taking all of the components that already existed in the hand cannon and kind of just gluing it together. The next evolution was the flintlock system, which, despite having a lot of strange-sounding parts involved, including the Frezen and my personal favorite, the gooseneck cock. Sir, is that a gooseneck cock in your pocket, or are you just happy to see me? If the powder was dry when you put it in there, there's a non-zero chance that it can be used in bad weather. You don't really get to pick the conditions when you're fighting, and having Frezen covering the powder meant there was a very significant chance that the powder wouldn't be damp when you went to shoot. It also meant you could use less powder for the same amount of shooting. The guns were still loaded at the muzzle, but you can at least more or less guarantee if you loaded it properly, you'd be able to actually shoot, which genuinely a big thing. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. The loudest noise you will ever experience in firearms is a click when you expected a bang. Flintlocks were replaced with breech loading, where you moved past muzzle loading into loading at the breech with nipple primers. At the same time, someone started to notice that realistically, if you're shooting, you're going to use the same amount of powder each time, so you can set out Around the same time, someone started to notice that realistically, if you're shooting, you're going to use the same amount of powder each time, so you can section out the powder beforehand and reload faster. So powder starts to become what's called breech charges instead. So this is somewhat modern, but it's still powder as one thing, bullets are another, and primers are these little nipples that you put on the primer port so that the hammer can smack them and they can go off. The breech loader is replaced with the so-called trapdoor rifle, the first where we have what you can really call modern ammunition. There's no more breech charges, there's no more priming caps, there's just ammunition. These weapons are in some cases adapted breech charge rifles, so in some cases they have a bit of a DIY feel about them, but in other cases they are full production modern built rifles. And that brings us to modern ammunition. See, modern ammunition has a circular primer in the back of the case, a case with a bunch of powder in it, and a bullet set into the case itself ready to go. And that brings us to a bullet term you've almost definitely heard before, but might not know the exact meanings around. Full metal jacket. In fact, I'd say most people know, generally hearing the description, what a full metal jacket is, but they don't know the related terms. A full metal jacket is kind of what it says on the tin. Bullets are made out of lead. However, in order to make the bullet harder, putting a brass outer shell and giving a full metal jacket around the bullet will make the bullet harder. Semi-jacketed ammunition is more commonly known nowadays as soft-point ammunition, but bringing up its original name explains the differences between the two types of ammunition, because while they are usually either very similar or identical designs, a semi-jacketed round only has a jacket going up to the top of the round, at which point somewhere near the top half it will transfer into a soft material. See, hollow points were a thing that companies knew about for various reasons for a long time, but up until the mid 1980s, if you wanted hollow point ammunition for your semi-automatic handgun, you were loading the bullet yourself. Hunters had been marketed, quote, express rounds for a variety of handgun platforms for years. These are rifle bullets with big cavities that reduce the weight of the bullet, with the side effect being that they happen to dump more energy on impact and have more efficacy at stopping animals. Side note, this is where the myth from the 60s and 70s of 357 Magnum, cops carrying that. The bullets that were in 9mm guns at the time was just 9mm ball ammunition. If you were carrying a 357, you were frequently permitted to either load your own round or bring hunting ammunition with you. And some of those rounds were legitimately, quote, man stoppers. They were marketed as express rounds to hunters, but because they had a cavity, they tended to dump all of their energy into the thing that they hit, and that ended up meaning that from a ballistics standpoint, somebody who is fighting somebody else was able to use less bullets to get the same neutralizing effect. One of the main reasons why most cops are not carrying this ammunition, the reason why hollow point ammunition has not been designed for most guns, is largely because ammunition tends to copy what the military does. And the military is following a misunderstanding of the Hague Convention of 1899. That said, exploding ammunition was banned from war, amongst a variety of other things. It's part of where we get trials on war crimes at all from, and it is one of the conventions that defines how we define war crimes and what we decide is and isn't legal in war. We never signed the first part of the treaty. We signed the rest. One of the parts that we did sign said that we're not going to use ammunition, quote, designed to cause grievous injury. So in the 80s and 90s, there were two big developments, Hydroshock and the black talons that are pictured here. Both were controversial. Black talons were only technically on the market for a short period of time, as they were a pile of calls for bans and new laws. However, all that led to was Winchester changing the branding of black talons. The bullets stayed the same, and every modern hollow point looks basically exactly like a black talon. As if to prove the point of how little the controversy mattered and how bullshit the Hague Convention limit was, the new U.S. Army 9mm ammunition exists in two flavors, one of which is a traditional ball full metal jacket, the other which is literally a continuation of the black talon line several decades later. It stopped being controversial and started being the bullet the Army uses. The important thing is what a bullet does in soft medium. A simple full metal jacket or ball is designed to just push a hole through a thing. However, an expanding bullet like a hollow point is much better for everyday carry as it expands when it hits the target. It dumps its energy into the thing it's hitting, meaning overpenetration is much less of an issue. Full metal jacket is fine if you're trying to poke a hole in a target. Not so great if your first thought is towards your community or your family during a moment of defense. Pistols and rifles use rifled barrels because a spin on a bullet helps. Think like throwing a football. The perfect throw will include the ball spinning in the air for stability. That is why most barrels have rifling and spin the bullet while they push as a way of creating a stable path. However, most shotguns don't use rifling. Now, most people think of shotguns as shooting, kind of the term shotgunning in English, the scattering of some randomness in front of you. And that absolutely is possible. They can have a cartridge that is a series of smaller bullets. They can also have things like darts or basically any shape that you can think of, and that includes essentially throwing a large rock. However, to continue the sports metaphor, a slug will act something like a knuckleball in pitching. A fastball is just throwing the ball with a spin. However, knuckleballs are when you grab the ball in a weird way so it doesn't spin properly, and then the ball does weird things in the air. It will curve left, it'll curve right. A slug is designed to be thrown through the air, much like a bullet. However, you have to understand it's not just that it will move. It will move randomly to the point that you can't really consistently place it beyond like 100 meters. Without some kind of stabilization, you don't know what the air is going to do because air is a funky thing. A couple things here at the end. You'll hear grains used a lot. As a unit. It's one that's easy to confuse. Just easy math for your head. 7,000 grains, 1 pound. Grains are a way of weighing small weights accurately, so you'll hear it both in bullets and when describing how much powder. However, those are different useful metrics. The bullet weight is absolute. The powder weight will be describing the weight in a specific powder. Different powders aren't interchangeable, and unless you're at the point where you're like advanced and reloading, it's more useful to understand feet per second than trying to understand the amount of explosive in the actual cartridge. I would also say for handgun ammunition, you are almost never going to bump into the point where the weight of the bullet will affect your accuracy. So a lot of the handgun concerns around bullet weight, you're not going to have. More importantly, when you're learning all this stuff, remember that numbers are wildly unrelated and fucking weird in the gun world. There are multiple scales. 40 is not more than 10, despite the fact that 4 is 4. Despite the fact that hearing 40, you would think it's 4 times the number. They are measuring different things on different scales because they're measured off of different ways of measuring. They are wildly different in where they're coming from. However, you can sometimes discover things. For example, there are a number of guns that if you want to shoot them, it is impossible to use the original calibers. However, if you talk to experts that say, no, this caliber is basically that caliber, or it's close enough to that shape that it'll work, there's a chance that they might work. Or you can learn useful things like how a lot of Russian arms development was built around the idea that barrels that fail for heavier calibers might be to spec for lighter calibers and can just be slapped together for those guns. Which is actually like, it's not the most insane idea in the world. That is going to be it from me, though. Thank you to everybody who tuned in and watched this. I really do appreciate it. Most importantly, thank you to my Patreon supporters. You're the only reason I get to keep making this stuff. Seriously, it means the world to me that y'all are supporting me here. If you want to support, head on over to patreon.com/queerarmorer. This week, people are voting on a shotgun project, which I'm really excited to announce in the future. It'll be a 3D printable shotgun library that's kind of aimed towards accessibility. However, my initial name ruffled more than a few feathers. So people are voting on what the new name will be over on Patreon. If you want to have a vote in that, or if you just want to get access to the videos a week early, sign up over there. That is going to be it for me, though. Thank you to everybody who tuned into this. And remember, moral doesn't mean legal, and Stonewall was a fucking riot. Peace.